welcome back, everybody, to the ROS Media channel. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on how the global financial system actually operates behind closed doors. When it comes to things like mortgages, credit cards, loans, or just banks in general, have you ever asked the question, where does the money come from? Well, we're going to do a deep dive into this because how your signature is used is a very powerful form of credit energy. And also, we're going to uncover why is the internet flooded with dangerous myths, I would say, surrounding cashing in birth certificates and this fallacy that the birth certificate is some kind of security or secret treasury account that you can tap into. So that's what we're going to cover today. That is the subject matter. Joining us is my good friend Ian Clifford, who is our founder and president here at the Republic of Old Souls. And I would love for you also to stay tuned until the very end, because we're going to give you an invitation to an upcoming live event this weekend where you can actually put the protocols that we talk about into action for yourself. So let's dive in. Ian, great to have you with us. I'm excited to talk about this one because there's a lot of chatter on the internet about birth certificates, and people are going down different rabbit holes here, there, and everywhere, and in some cases getting themselves into a bit of trouble with this as well. So I thought maybe the best place to start, as we always do, is starting at the beginning. You know, you talk about a monopoly board. So just for people who've maybe never ventured into this subject matter before, could you explain what you mean when you describe that our modern global financial system is some kind of giant monopoly board run by the establishment? What do you mean by that?
Well, the game of Monopoly is obviously it's an artificial game. You might win it, but it doesn't really have any substance to it. It's a game, but whilst you're playing it, you can get quite serious about playing it. What we don't realise, or what most people don't realise, is that the whole world is of common. That because it's actually bankrupt, and the whole monopoly board and everything on it is operating under a bankruptcy. The reorganization of the United States, they call it a reorganization, it's actually a bankruptcy from June 5th, 1933. So what's going on is you've got this game that's everyone's playing with a player piece that they use on the monopoly board. They move that player piece around in the game of commerce using money of account, which they believe has got substance, but of course it doesn't really have any substance backing it. What it has is human energy backing it. So everybody's playing a game of Monopoly where everything on the monopoly board is owned by the creditors of the original bankruptcy. So if you imagine the entire world, imagine all of the assets, the land, the property, the buildings, all of the minerals, everything was mortgaged to bail out the United States, which is a corporate government in 1933, because the United States was and still is the world reserve currency. So everything on the monopoly board is basically used as collateral for the original bailout of the United States as a corporate entity. And everything has two titles, and it's really quite interesting when you get into, where people have this perception of ownership. They have a perception of wealth because they think they own things like their car, their house, their business, their investments. They think that they've got these things and they own them. Well, what they actually have is the use of them, because everything on the monopoly board is owned by the creditors, the original creditors. So if you don't own it, but you're using it, that normally means that you've got to pay some kind of rental because you're using something that doesn't belong to you, which is where taxes come in. So tax is really just rent for using what you don't actually own. What you have is you have the use of the things. So you get this thing called equitable title, which means that you can use these things like the car, the house, the business. You can use any of the assets that are already have already been used as collateral for the bankruptcy, And the legal title of all of these assets is what's been offered up as collateral for the bankruptcy. But there's one other thing that's been offered up as a major piece of the jigsaw puzzle, which is the birth certificate itself, but not as a security, as a mechanism that puts human energy onto the monopoly board. And this is where so many people have so far not grasped what the actual birth certificate is. What's it used for? What is it? What can you do with it? And I've yet to, I've done quite a bit of research in this area, and there's so many myths and so many stories flowing around the internet, people joining webinars, people being interviewed, people buying into courses, people paying subscriptions, people actually drafting up processes and sending them in to the Treasury, the Treasury in the country they're in, or the United States Treasury, or actually taking birth certificates into courtrooms, which is even more dangerous. So the monopoly board is an artificial game. It's all operating in bankruptcy. The whole monopoly board is based on debt. So everything on the monopoly board has a negative value because it's all debt related. The original creditors were, and still are, the original bloodline banking families who bailed out the United States gradually over the next, from 1933 up to 1974. You've got the decoupling of gold from that used to underpin the world money system, and then all you've now got is human energy backing the money system, and it's moved from a money of account system. So if you think of it like Monopoly, if you were a player of Monopoly over 100 years ago, your Monopoly notes would have actually been backed by gold. Well, that was all taken away from the people, and then they put the notes on the Monopoly board that you can use, and now they're backed by human energy. So that was the big shift of what's going on with the money system. And many people have written about parts of this. You've got people writing about the bankruptcy of the United States, House Joint Resolution 192. You've got people talking about ex nihilo credit, which is how the money of account gets onto the monopoly board. You've got people talking about securities. You've got people, which is the debt that's on the monopoly board. You've got people talking about how they believe the world economy works, and then you've got people talking about cryptocurrency and the BRICS and the CBDCs and all of these things, which people go down all these different rabbit holes, and some of them are quite intellectual in their research, but they fundamentally don't understand the game of Monopoly. They just don't get it. Their analysis is about what you're doing on the board, not how the board's been constructed. And that's right, where the missing information is. That very few people have actually said, well, hold on a minute, how do we get to this point? What's going on with this framework? Because nobody talks about that. I do, but I've yet to see anybody else talk about how it all came about. They take it for granted. They talk about what's going on the monopoly board, but they frame it as if your money is worth something. Kind of is, but it's a debt. They frame it as if you own things. They frame it as if you can lose things. You can't lose things that you don't own. You might lose the use of the things, but you can't actually lose the thing if you don't own it. And they talk about taxes as if taxes actually run the economy. So, the story that we've all been told is that, taxes are a good thing because if you pay them, the government can use them to finance the roads and the schools and the hospitals, and they can build stuff, and they can finance armies, and they can protect you, and they can get the police force, and they can finance the courts, and all of these things which most people would say, yeah, we need all those things. And the only way the government can finance them is through taxes. So taxes are a good thing. And if anybody doesn't pay their taxes, we're going to put them in the stocks and throw old cabbages at them because they're not paying their taxes. Well, do we really need taxes? That's what I say. I mean, where do they go? And given the fact that the money is being created and it's backed by human energy, why should the humans be paying taxes on their own energy? It's it's an extraordinary subject when you start getting into it.
It is. Well, we'll try and avoid going down rabbit holes if we can. I mean, let's talk a little bit about this myth that you've mentioned, sort of debunking this birth certificate secret trust myth as well. I mean, when a baby is born and registered, how does the government, first of all, I want people to understand the relationship that the living have with the birth certificate, first of all. So how does the government use that birth certificate construct under the living person's or living soul's name? How does that come about, first of all?
When you walk through the process of what's actually going on, you see your mum and your dad, they're in the hospital, the newborn baby's just come into the world, and everyone's thinking about and focusing on that. And why not? It's a major event in anyone's life. So then, not that long after, the mum normally is tapped up by the midwife. Oh, you've got to register the baby, yeah. So, and if you don't do that, there's all kinds of issues, and they're going to chase you about, and basically you get strong-armed into registering what you think is the baby into this system. Oh yeah, if you want your baby to have access to social insurance, like the benefit system, if the baby ever needs it, you're going to have to register them. If you want the baby to go to school, you're going to have to register the baby. If you want the baby to get a driving license and a passport, you're going to have to register the baby into the system. So it sounds very compelling. And most parents, mums and dads would go, well, everybody else is doing it. If we don't do it, it appears to be a load of problems. If we do it, which is pretty easy, then, this new baby that we've just brought to the world should have all of these opportunities that they can enjoy going forward. But what they don't realise is that it's not actually the baby that's being registered. It's the placenta that is being registered. And that placenta, of course, it's connected to the baby. It was the cord of life, if you like, for the baby, and so they're registering the placenta, and then that placenta dies. So what's actually going on is the birth certificate is the registration of the placenta, which is then a decedent estate. It's a dead estate because the placenta dies. Now it's linked to the baby because, as was the placenta, it's like a DNA linkage. So you've got a connection there anyway. And then, of course, the baby is too young to do any commerce. They're not going to play Monopoly for many years. So the mum and the dad look after the baby, and the baby's got this name, which sounds perfectly logical. It's the name of the family name, the surname of the family. So, nobody's going to say, well, that's a bit weird. Why did you call your baby the same name as your family? No one's going to challenge that because that seems quite normal. Everybody else is doing it, So no one's going to say, hey, that's weird. You should call your baby something else. It goes after the name of the family name, which people think actually belongs to them. Which is an interesting thing because there's quite a few Smiths in the world, quite a few Patels in the world, quite a few Browns, Joneses, but these families believe that this name is their family name, and yet there's thousands, maybe millions of families with the same name, which is an interesting way of looking at it. So actually the baby then grows up, gets to 18 or 21, 18 in most countries, and wants to start, getting things, wants to start playing the game of Monopoly without even realising that they are playing the game of Monopoly. And they want to get a driving licence, they want to get a bank account, they maybe want to get a job, they might want to go to college, they might want to go to uni, they might want to do all these different things. They need to show that they are who they say they are. So it's like, well, you know, have you got a social insurance number? Have you got some kind of identification when you go to the bank? We can't give you a bank account unless we know who you are. But what you're actually doing is registering a bank account in the name of this decedent estate. You're registering the social insurance card if you have one of those, which is actually for the decedent estate. You've got a driving license, passport, maybe come later when you've got some cash flows coming in. You probably can't use the passport unless you're going away with your mum and dad until you get a bit older. All of these things are all in the name of the decedent estate. Now, typically, people think that decedent estate, that name on the passport, driving license, birth certificate is them, because nobody says it's not you, and everybody else seems to be following the same belief. So it's never really challenged. Now, as soon as you start using these things that actually are the references of the decedent estate, as soon as you start using those things as if that decedent estate was you, now you are operating as its agent, because substance over form. You don't need an agency agreement. Nobody comes to your house and says, sign this bit of paper. You are now the agent for the birth certificate construct or this decedent estate. It's done through substance. You know, you're doing it through action, not through a bit of paper or words. You know, actions speak louder than words. So if you're representing the birth certificate construct, the decedent estate, as its agent now you become liable for anything that the birth certificate construct is doing on this artificial game of Monopoly. So without realizing it, you've become the surety, the underwriter, the liable party, the living soul that's underwriting the commercial liabilities of the Monopoly board, which is all operating in debt. The birth certificate construct is a debtor entity by definition. But it gets a little worse than that, because the birth certificate construct is registered to the state. So, and this is where people have made a mistake. Because the birth certificate is registered to the state, and because the state is using the birth certificate, looks like they're using it as collateral for the bankruptcy.
Right.
I think, therefore, it must have a value. So what people have done is gone, right, we know that we know it's a monopoly board. We know it's an artificial game that everyone's playing. Yep. We know that it's operating in bankruptcy, and we know that the birth certificate construct is not the living soul, and we also know that the birth certificate is being registered to the state, so therefore it must have a collateral value. It's got to be valuable, otherwise why else would they? Why would they register it if it wasn't worth anything? And then they go down this pathway of, well, it's got to be worth its weight in gold. That's the weight of the baby. That's one of the stories that goes around. It's got to have a future value of $100 million, because that's if you add all those birth certificates up, that is what's being offered up as the collateral for the bankruptcy. So it's got to be very highly valuable. And because people then go a bit further, they say, well, of course, the birth certificate is being used by me, and I can also use this collateral value because it really belongs to me, because it's really all about me, and I'm the living soul, and I can cash it in, or I can use it as collateral, because the state's using it as collateral, but it doesn't really belong to them. What I can do is I can take out a lien over it, because it's worth, let's say it's worth $100 million. Yeah. If I, the living soul, take out a lien, so take out like a debt, a registered debt, and they do it through something called UCC1. If I can register a debt against it, because I'm the living soul, basically it's mine. The government's using it as collateral. I'm now going to claim it as my collateral, I'm going to put $100 million lien over it. And now I can say it's a security. It's got 100 million lien against it in my name, in the name of the, for my benefit, which is the living soul's benefit. Now I can start using it as a security. And then they go a little bit further and they say, okay, fine. Look at the social insurance number. That's a CUSIP number. That's a securities number. And they start saying things like you can find the birth certificate bond by looking it up in the you can go to platforms like Fidelity, which is where you can find all these registered securities, and you can look up this number, which is the social insurance number. You may have to change the beginning and the end digits, play around with it a bit, but then you find this security, like an investment fund that's got massive amount of capital invested in it, and you can go, aha, now I can prove that my birth certificate is part of that fund because the number is the same as my social insurance number. That proves that my birth certificate is worth all this money, and I can start to use it to discharge debt. I can start using it if I'm in court. I can hold it. I can give it to the judge and say the case, is a commercial. It's a commercial case, and my birth certificate is bonded. It's worth $100 million. I'm handing it to you. You take the cost of the case out of the bond.
Yeah.
And then I'll walk out here without any debt, because all the cases appear to be commercial. They all appear to be debt-based, and you're handing over $100 million security, which is for the benefit of the living soul. Here you are, judge. Here's the birth certificate. It's a lien over it in my favour. You go and use that. You go and settle the case using the bond that I've just handed to you, which is worth a lot more than the case. And that's generally what a lot of people are doing. So the myth is that the birth certificate itself is a security. It's not. Okay. If you believe it is a security, then people believe that the value of the security belongs to them, and they try and rationalize that by putting this lien over it. It's called the movement of people that believe all this is called the redemption movement. So they advocate UCC1 lien over the birth certificate. You can do all kinds of other interesting things, like you can validate the name on there, and you can claim the name. You can register the name as a corporate entity, as a company, and you can register the name with a copyright, with a trademark. You can say, look, I prove that this birth certificate name is mine because I've got a trademark, I've got a copyright, I've got a company, I've got a lien over this birth certificate name, and it's a security as well as it's my name, so it's all mine, and I can use it within the monopoly board for my benefit. And that's what a lot of people are believing, and all sorts of derivatives of those things I've just, yeah.
So why is that narrative entirely wrong? And why is it dangerous? If the birth certificate doesn't actually have a cash value, what is it there for? What's its actual role when it comes to how we operate in this monopoly board of commerce?
Well, the people that believe all those things I've just described, they're nearly right. They're nearly right, but they're not quite right. They've got a number of things right. It's a decedent estate. They might say that. Yeah, they've got that right. It's operating like a trust. Yeah, it's like a trust because there is the settlement of the placenta into it. So it's like a trust because there is some property that's settled into it. You've then got the fact of the people saying, "Oh yeah, well, of course, we're going to make the government the trustee of it, and we're the beneficiary because it's a trust. Yeah, so we'll make the state the trustee, and we'll retain our position as beneficiary because we are, of course, and then we can tell the trustee what we want them to do with it, which is they're almost right there. But the problem is that it's an estate which is like a trust. That you could say an estate is a trust. I could go along with that. You couldn't really argue too much against that. The estate, because it's a decedent estate, has to have an executor.
Okay.
And where people are not understanding this is that if you've got a decedent estate, every decedent estate has to have an executor that looks after it, that is responsible for its whatever it's doing, or its activities, its affairs. Let's put it down like that. Its affairs. So what happens is the living soul becomes or occupies the office of the executor de Centaur, because you can't occupy the office and use it as if it were you, because it isn't you.
No.
But you can occupy the office as its executor de Centaur. It's like an imposter is using it as if it was theirs, and that creates this executor de Centaur, which is exactly what the state want. They want you to operate the birth certificate construct as a decedent estate, as occupying the office of the executor de Centaur, because they want you to be operating it unlawfully, because that takes away all your rights. So they want, but so people have got a lot of these things nearly right, and what they haven't got right is that it is a decedent estate, and it is registered to the state, and it's because it's registered to the state, they think it therefore must have a value. But its value is not in it as a security. Its value is that it is a banking entity.
Right. Okay.
It's a banking entity that can issue promises to pay. Let me give you an example. So if you take someone who has just turned age 18 and they've never ever done anything other than spend their mum's money.
Okay.
She gave them pocket money every week. They never had a job. They didn't get a paper round. They never had a bank account, a post office account, or anything. They just spent their mum's money, their pocket money, and suddenly they want to get a bank account.
Right.
Because they've now got themselves a job. So they need something to bank their wages. They've just turned 18.
Okay.
So they go to the bank and they open a bank account and they say, I need this account because I've got this wage that's going to come in and I need to be able to bank it in my account. So the bank says, okay, give us all the details that we need to open the account, and they get the account opened. And the wages start coming in. Fantastic. Now they've got some money to spend on the Monopoly board. But as soon as they start spending money on the Monopoly board, and maybe they want a credit card because they might get one of those, that's a good idea. Yeah, we can get a credit card. We can go on that holiday that we can't really afford, but we can get a credit card and we can go the credit card. Or maybe we get a loan because the banks are offering loans at the moment, and we can buy ourselves a car. Or we go down the garage and they say, hey, if you want this car, nice shiny car, we've got finance going, and you've got a salary now, you've got a bank account, you're over the age of 18, why not get a car? All my friends have got a car, I'm going to get a car, let's get a car, okay, however much that is, let's get a loan.
Yeah.
How do you get a bank account that's going to make payments? How do you get a loan that might be securing a car? How do you get a credit card that you might use to go on your first holiday abroad with the signature? With the signature that is the energy of the living soul that's now going to transfer through the banking entity, which is the birth certificate construct, that's now going to start issuing debt securities. And those securities, the value of bank payments, the value of the credit card, the value of the loan, maybe then a couple of years later, they get to like 22, 23, hey, you're doing really well, let's get a mortgage.
Yeah, get my own place.
Girlfriend, I've got a boyfriend, depending on who we're talking about. Let's go and get a mortgage. We'll sign up for a mortgage. We've got income coming in. We've got cash flow coming in. We've got a little bit of savings. We can put a deposit down. Let's go and get a mortgage. So sign up for the mortgage. And that is another, the face value of the mortgage is another debt that can only be created through the signature. So that birth certificate has enabled bank account spending, credit card, loan, and mortgage, all before the age of 25.
Yeah.
That certainly was for me, maybe not so much for the younger generation today, because maybe that's 35 now before you get all those things. But in my generation, I had all those things before I was 25. So suddenly what's going on is without the birth certificate, just got to wind the clock back. Got a job. Well, you can't get a job without a birth certificate. Because who are you?
Yeah.
So you're going to have one of those things, or you're going to have to say who you are, otherwise you can't get a job. You can't go to the bank and say, give me an account. And they say, well, what's your name? You say, well, I'm not telling you.
Yeah.
Well, have you got any ID? No. I just want an account because I've got a job and they're just going to pay me into the account, but I'm not telling you who I am. It's not going to work, is it? The bank's going to say, well, unless you tell us who you are, we're not going to give you an account. So you say, well, okay, that's the only way it works. I'll give you my social insurance card, or I'll give you my some document I've got with the name of the birth certificate construct on it. So now you're in the game. And now what you've done is you've held yourself out as if you were the birth certificate construct. Of course you aren't. But the bank won't give you that account unless you represent that you are. You don't go in there and say, hey, I know how this works. The birth certificate construct is not me. I'm its agent. So give me an account for the birth certificate construct as the agent. It's an agency. I'm the agent of this birth certificate. No one says that to the bank. They just want the account. Just give me the account. I want to get that credit card. I want to get that loan, and later on I want to get that mortgage. So you get coerced into it. And basically what's going on is the birth certificate itself, and if you look at the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882, it's very clear that a birth certificate is a person. Okay, so everyone's going to say, well, surely a person's a human being, aren't they? Surely that's what everybody refers to humans, a person. Well, a person in the law books is not a human being. It's an artificial construct. You can say a company is a person because it's a corporate entity. So the terminology of person, which most people think is a human, it's not. It's the birth certificate construct. So when you look at the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882, it says that a banker is a body of persons.
Yeah.
That is the birth certificate construct. So its value is in its ability to transfer human energy onto the monopoly board and issue banking instruments, these negotiable instruments, as it describes in the Bills of Exchange Act of 1882. If you didn't have the person, if you weren't representing the person as its agent, you wouldn't be able to issue negotiable instruments. So if you just play that out, right? Let's imagine your mum and dad never registered the decedent estate.
Yeah.
And you know your name's Jack, and you turn up at the bank, and they say, "Well, Jack, we need to know who you are." And you say, "My name's Jack." You say, "Well, what's your family name?" "I haven't got one." "Have you got any documents with you, Jack, that shows you who you are?" "No, my name's Jack. I want an account."
Still not going to work.
And then, maybe you could make up a name and forge some papers or something like that and get an account. Well, then, you want to get a loan, and they're going to try and do searches on you, and they can't find you anywhere because you're not in the system. Yeah. Even if you got an account by forging some documents. You're not on any system, because the social insurance number is how they find you. So you're never going to be able to make bank payments. They're going to close your account. You're never going to be able to get that credit card, loan, or mortgage, because the birth certificate construct doesn't exist. So you can't play Monopoly. So the birth certificate has a value because it is a way of playing Monopoly as a banking entity. But it doesn't have a value that you can cash in or use as collateral for debts or for court cases, or sending it. In the worst scenarios, I've seen people actually bundle the birth certificate up. They get all these affidavits written, and this is theirs, and they've got the UCC1, which is this lien, 100 million lien, and they've got all these papers, and they've got financing statements, and all this whole bundle of paper, and they send it to the US Department of Treasury and say, I am appointing you, Secretary of the Treasury, as my treasurer, because it's allegedly it's a trust, and I'm now the beneficiary. I'm the lead creditor. Look at my $100 million lien, and you have been appointed as the trustee of this trust. And then they might talk about the Sesquivet V Act of 1666, and they might start talking about it's a Sesquivet trust, and they might put that in their documents. It's Sesquivet trust, and it's worth 100 million, and I'm appointing you as the trustee, and I want you to send me back 100 million. Which is mine, of course, because I've read these documents on the internet, and I've been to a course, and they tell you that the birth certificate could be worth 100 million, and you can register this lien against it. So it's got to be worth 100 million because you registered a lien at $100 million against it.
Yeah.
And some people have actually, if you get more extreme, I mean, there's a really good case of people who've taken liens out over judges.
Okay.
So they say, right, what we're going to do here is we're going to lien the judge. So we're going to get the judge has got a birth certificate. So that birth certificate's worth 100 million. We're going to take out a lien over the judge's, the birth certificate name, the name of the decedent estate. We're going to register a lien over the judge, and then we're going to tell the judge that if you don't sort the case out in my favour, I'm going to basically cash this lien in against your birth certificate construct because I've got a lien over it.
Okay.
And we're going to leverage the judge to go along with whatever they want the judge to go along with. And people have actually gone to jail for doing that very thing in that way. So, and it's all because they believe that the birth certificate's worth something. And see, what they do is they say, well, you've caused me damages of 100 million, so I'll put a lien over your birth certificate trust, which has got to be worth 100 million. You're a judge, and then you owe it to me. Liening the judge, all because they believe the birth certificate's got a value. Of course, it has no value whatsoever. It's just the registration of a decedent estate, and that decedent estate can operate as a banker. Doesn't have to, because you may never want a bank account, you may never want a loan, a mortgage, or a credit card. But you'd be quite unusual if you never had any of those things. How are you going to play the game of Monopoly if you don't have those things? So you get drawn into it. You start using the birth certificate as if it were you. You start using it because you want to get a bank account, loan, credit card, mortgage, and now you're in the game. And now you're occupying the office of the executor de son tour. You're using all these things in wrong. You don't realise it. You've lost all your rights because you're operating in fraud, but you've put a lot of securities into the game. You've put all these promises into the Monopoly board. Now you add up the world debt. Okay, what's that? Like, a lot of people are talking about more than $400 trillion. Well, all of those mortgages, loans, credit cards, bank payments, all of those promises to pay in the future you add them all together for the whole world population, going all the way back for many years, that's your $400 trillion.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you can't function on this board without it, because you can't get a bank account. You can't open your bank account. It's going to be difficult to get a job, pay your wages in there. You can't leverage any finance or credit in any way, shape, or form, because you're going to need that quote unquote ID to be able to do that, to prove who you think you are. But most people are going to sit there thinking, well, you said that it's a banking entity, so it has a value to it. So it does actually have value to it. It has a positive side to it. I would say, speaking on behalf of most people who are maybe struggling today, they won't necessarily see playing the game of Monopoly as anything advantageous to them right now, because they are in debt, they're mortgaged up to the hilt. Maybe they've lost their job, maybe they've been demoted, maybe they've been pushed to one side. The economy isn't what it used to be. I remember when I was young, it's a long time ago, but I remember when I used to go down to the job centre, and you used to have all the tickets in the window of the job centre, and you could walk in there and you could pick 20 really great jobs, get interviews for 10 of them, and get 5 or 6 offers. Can't do that anymore. So I know the economy's changed. We all know that, and people are struggling. So if they don't own the birth certificate, and it's not some secret trust that's worth 100 million or whatever the value people think or perceive it to be, but we require it to play the game of Monopoly. The fact that it is a banking entity, as you mentioned, and that it issues securities and negotiable instruments, I want people to understand where that true value is. It's not got a monetary value to it as we know it, but it does have a value to it. And I think the only way that people are going to understand how that works is if we really start talking about that question that I mentioned at the beginning: where does the money come from?
Well, the money really is energy. So what's going on here is the birth certificate construct doesn't belong to the living man, woman, the living soul. The energy does.
Yeah.
So the energy flows from the living soul through the banking entity, which is the birth certificate construct, onto this artificial monopoly board. So what's happened is the energy is being converted. Labor has been converted into debt securities. Okay. And it's the debt securities, bank payments, mortgages, loans, credit cards. There are more, but let's just talk about those 4. Those securities are now abandoned by the living soul in most cases. So you put this energy, you've transferred your energy through the birth certificate contract, which is this banking entity, onto the monopoly board, and then you abandon it because you don't know that you actually have a right to receive the value of that energy back, but not by going after the banks that you made the bank payments to, or the mortgage company that you took the mortgage out with, or the loan or credit card company, because this debt that is now on the monopoly board, your debt, you created it, it generates a tax revenue for the United States Treasury, who use the taxes to finance the creditors. Well, the living soul is a creditor. The birth certificate construct is not a creditor. It's a banking entity. It's a debtor. It's issuing debt all the time, as everything else on the monopoly board is operating as a debtor. So the birth certificate is a mechanism that enables debt to be issued. But what is underpinning that debt is human energy. And you can't write to everyone and say, hey, I made you some bank payments 20 years ago. I've now realized that I am the creditor. to these bank payments, and I want you to give me the money back, or write to the bank and say, give me the mortgage face value, because I've now realized that I'm the creditor. You couldn't have created this mortgage without my energy. I want you to send me the value of the energy back because it belongs to me. It doesn't work like that, because those securities, what they do is they generate a tax revenue for the bankruptcy trustee to use.
Okay.
It's those taxes that you can redirect, which you couldn't do unless you'd actually put the energy on the board through the birth certificate construct. So I suppose the way to look at this is, if somebody lent you a chisel and said, here, Ian, I heard you're a bit handy with sculpting. And you said, yeah, I've won some awards, actually. Not a bad sculptor. Here's a chisel. Can you go and chisel me a sculpture with my chisel? And you say, okay, fine. Okay. So I say, yeah, okay, I'll go and do that. And I go and make this amazing statue. The chisel enabled me to make the statue, yeah?
Yep.
That chisel doesn't belong to me. But I used it to make an amazing statue. And I can't go and claim the statue, because maybe the statue's a bit of rock that belongs to the state. Huh?
Okay.
And I can't claim the value of the chisel because it's not mine.
No.
But I can use it. And that's what you're doing with bank payments, mortgages, loans, credit cards. You're using an artificial construct, which is a banking entity, to create things that you don't actually have a right to. Like, I couldn't go to the statue and say, hey, that's mine. I made it with the chisel, because the chisel isn't yours. It wasn't mine, yeah? I can't go and say, that statue belongs to me, I'll give it to me. It's made out of rock that belongs to someone else. Everything on the monopoly board is owned by the original creditors, yeah?
Yeah.
The chisel that I made it with doesn't belong to me. That's the equivalent of the birth certificate. But when people start paying to come and watch that, have a look at that statue, they're basically paying rent to look at my work.
Yeah.
Well, I can get that, because that's like, all these banks are using my debt securities for financing all these different things, but they're paying taxes for using my energy. It's like people coming to look at my statue, and they're paying an entrance fee to come and look at my statue. I want that.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I can't have the statue. I can't say the chisel was mine, but I can get the rent or the viewing fees.
Entry
and
fee.
what you can get, if people can get the taxes, because the banks are using the energy, which is debt, has created these debt securities. You can't get the securities, but you can get the taxes that the banks are paying to use the securities. That's what you can get back, which you couldn't get if you didn't have the birth certificate construct. If you weren't the agent for the birth certificate construct, you could never get the taxes.
Right. Okay. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse in reality. It's a curse because it's not us. We're tied to it through agency, as you mentioned earlier. Just not that we signed an agreement to be an agent, but just through, like you said, substance over form. So we've been doing it since the age of 18, showing up unbeknownst to us. I am that person. I'll sign on the dotted line. Here's my driver's license. Here's my, passport. Here's my ID, as we all do and all have done, and probably many will continue to do. So I understand that the agency side is there, and that we are liable as the agent for what happens with the birth certificate. But if it's a banking entity, and if the system is designed this way, as in it cannot create negotiable instruments without this banking entity and without the living soul putting that signature down, that is the spark, that's the catalyst to everything that is pushed on the monopoly board. So when the banks create credit from our signature, if we've got the ability to recoup these taxes paid against the signature, then let's talk a little bit about that, because you mentioned a moment ago as well about OIDs, original issue discounts. So how do the banks use these securities that we create? How do they kind of secretly bundle them up and sell them on the secondary market? Because I want people to understand that if they go down and they get a car loan or a credit card from the bank, or they go and get themselves a mortgage, it doesn't just sit there at that local bank, does it? The mortgage documents that you sign, they don't stick it in some kind of safe for the next 25 years. And then, when you've paid your house off, they bring it back out and they tear it up in front of you and say, hey, we're all done now. They don't do that.
Yeah, we're all done. No, they don't.
So what
do
happens?
That, no.
What happens there, so that people can understand the journey of how this works?
So you sign up for a mortgage, and what you're actually doing is you're making a deposit, because you're depositing energy into the Monopoly Board system.
Yeah.
That deposit is an asset to you. It's your asset, but to the bank, they take it in so that they can create the debt, which is equal to the asset. So all debt is created in the same way. There's an asset, which is a promise to pay in the future, which is a deposit. Yeah. The banks match it with a liability equal to the value of the promise. So if it's $1 million mortgage, you're promising to pay back $1 million. That promise is an asset which the bank can match with a liability of $1 million. That's the $1 million mortgage. It's the liability. It's the debt. That is the debt security. And then what happens is because they know that if you're going to use that $1 million to buy a house or refinance a house, you're going to pay them interest, yeah, because that's part of the deal. So they can use this $1 million debt with a load of cash flow attached to it, interest and principal. This $1 million could now be worth $4 million.
Yeah,
with all the interest and the repayment of the $1 million at the end. Yeah, so they didn't have $1 million. They've invented, they've conjured this $1 million out of the signature. It's sprung into existence. It never existed before, but now it's got a value, a future value of all of the interest payments, and the fact that $1 million is paid back in principal as well. So you add all that together, it's got a very high future value. So what they do is the banks that create the mortgages, loans, credit cards, they sell the and the investment banks, they use those debt securities. They put them into pools. In the investment bank sort of parlance-ly jargon that they use, they tranche them up. They put them into tranches, into portfolios, and then they want to disguise those portfolios, so they register them under street names at a company called Seeding Company most of the time, who hold on to them as like custodians. So now they've got this big bundle of these debt securities held in these names, which you won't easily be able to identify which name of these tranches belongs to which bank. And then the banks that are using them, they can increase the value of those tranches that they can take out. They can go and get one of their friends in another bank to give them a line of credit against these securities, because there's all this cash flow, these interest payments that are coming in. So suddenly it's starting to look like an interesting business. You start with zero, you end up with huge value, future value. Yeah. You can use that as collateral because it's quite reliable. You've got all these interest payments coming in. You can go to your mate down the road who runs another bank, and that they can give you a line of credit. So now you can use that, you can multiply it up using this line of credit. It's called hypothecation, because what you're actually doing is you're using somebody else's asset that doesn't belong to you, if you're the bank, the investment bank, but you can use it as if it were yours. And you can get a line of credit against it, and you can then expand, and you can go and do other things with that line of credit, all off the back of the fact that it all originated from the signature. Right. So that abandoned energy is now being used by the banks as nominees because they're not creditors, because this energy doesn't belong to them. But they can use it in all different ways, lots of financial engineering going on. They can use it, they disguise it, they hide it away in these street name tranches, which are under the custodianship of seeding company, and they hope that you never find out.
Okay.
Because what they want you to do is just be a good debt slave, pay the mortgage every month, get to the end of the term, pay them the principal or pay it gradually over the time, never ask any questions, and then they get away with, they've used that security for however many years, and they've been able to use it as their collateral to get more financing so they can go off and do other ventures with this collateral loan that they're going to get all the time. None of this collateral actually belongs to them because it's all based on the human energy that's been abandoned, and they assume that you're just going to be like one of the billions out there who don't understand how the game of Monopoly works. You're going to abandon these securities. You're never going to make a claim against them.
No.
They can use them for as long as they want, and they make a lot of profit off the back of using them. But they know that they've got to pay tax to use them, but they also don't think that you're ever going to realize that those taxes that they are paying for the use of your energy actually belongs to you. They presume that you're never going to realize that you've got an entitlement to the taxes that they're paying on your human energy. So what they do is they pay these taxes year by year based on an original issue discount calculation. So they've got this high future value of each of these securities in tranches. Yeah. They know that they've got to pay tax for the use of them. They don't pay it to you. They never tell you that you're owed taxes, but they pay the United States Treasury a tax every year for using your energy and lots of other people's energy without you or all these other people ever realizing, and nobody's becomes alerted to this because they don't want you to know, and it's quite difficult to find it out. It's all going on in those black boxes and those mysterious, buildings. You ever go to New York and see all the investment banks? It's like, well, wonder what they're all doing in there. Well, you never really get to know unless you're on the inside. Because most of it is just trading human energy, right? And generally what they're doing. So the original issue discount is a mechanism that enables them to value the taxes that they've got to pay for the use of the energy, and they make those tax payments each year. They don't pay anywhere near enough taxes because the tax module they pay it on is a voluntary tax module.
Okay, so let me get this straight, and I'm looking at this from someone's perspective who's never heard this before. What you're telling me here is, if I go to the bank and I want a mortgage for $1 million, then as soon as I sign on the paper, I'm the one that's created that $1 million pound asset. They then take that asset, even though it's mine, they take that asset, they then create a matching liability on the other side of the ledger. So they create a matching debt to the asset that I've just, unbeknownst to me, handed to them on a silver plate. And then for the privilege, they then sell me that debt for the next 25 years, including interest, while they then take the asset, sell it to an investment bank, so pocket the cash for the sale of the asset that I've just signed, double dip on me by me paying mortgage payments plus interest for the next 25 years, and then the investment banks hide all of that away in some big bucket somewhere with a different name on it, and they also trade those and make a ton of money on the back of that. I think the question here is, it's not really a case of, do I go and open a bank account? Maybe we should all open banks instead of bank accounts.
Well, that's the problem, that you can't get a banking license. It's near impossible.
Yeah.
To get a banking license to do what they call ex nihilo credit creation. They reserve banking licenses for those that are part of the club, part of the banking
Right.
cabal. So unless you're in that club, you probably never get a banking license, because it's literally it's a license to print money, because they do print money all the time. That's why the saying, it's like printing money. Banking is printing money, and they don't give that license away unless you sign up with their dark ways.
Yeah.
So most people would never get a license. But what you can do is you can structure things so that you can redirect those taxes that the banks are paying for the use of the energy, and you can use the birth certificate construct as a banking entity to issue negotiable instruments. But you can only issue those negotiable instruments to a bank, because they've got to convert them into this ex nihilo credit creation, this asset liability matching model. So that it's only banks that can do that. You can't do that. You can't go to to your mate's company and say, hey, if I promise to pay you back $1 million, can you send me $1 million? Because he hasn't got that. That company hasn't got that ability. It's only the banks that have got that ability to do that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the silver lining to this then. Let's talk a little bit more about the architecture itself, because if the banks are acting as nominees on behalf of the creditors, and we're the creditors, so we literally, every time we put that golden signature down, could be with pen and ink, could be, as you mentioned, it could be tapping your phone, it could be signing an online form. They're all classed as signature events, aren't they? So if the banks are doing that, and we have the ability to redirect the taxes that the investment banks are paying on these huge tranches that they are trading, then I'd love to know, and I think the audience would love to know, how on earth is that done?
So the only way you can redirect taxes is you have to create an entity which you can put on the monopoly board that in its own right can become a creditor entity that you can redirect the taxes to it, because only creditors can reclaim or redirect taxes. Debtors can't do it. So you can't structure anything that is trying to redirect taxes back to a debtor entity, because the debtor is not entitled to the taxes. Only creditors are entitled to the taxes. So unless you're one of the bloodline banking families, which is probably unlikely, you're not entitled to the taxes if you put your birth certificate construct forward and say, right, I'm going to file a tax return or a series of returns that, I can access these tax redirection mechanism, and you send it all in from the birth certificate construct name. It's not going to work, because that is a debtor entity. It doesn't belong to you either. Remember, it's registered to the state. So even if a check came out, or the IRS, United States Treasury, redirected taxes to it, ultimately it doesn't belong to you, because that entity is registered to the state, and it's a debtor entity, and it's not entitled to the tax redirection in the first place. So you've got to put a vehicle onto the monopoly board, and that vehicle is a foreign grantor's trust, which you can only get from the IRS, from Cincinnati, and you have to manually get it, and it has to be outside of the United States. It can't be the United States trust entity. It has to be a foreign alien to the United States, outside of their tax system, outside of the bankruptcy. It can't be part of the bankruptcy, because everything on the monopoly board is part of the bankruptcy. But if you register a foreign grantor's trust outside of the United States, it means it's outside of the bankruptcy as a creditor entity. So now it's entitled to redirect taxes to it, because it's not part of the bankruptcy. It's not a debtor entity.
Right.
And the living soul can operate as a beneficiary of it.
Okay.
That's how you get your energy back, not through the birth certificate construct,
No.
but through a new entity, which is a foreign grantors trust that sits outside of the bankruptcy as a creditor entity. And now it can file, that creditor entity can file tax returns, 1099 OID, because it wants to get the taxes that the banks are paying under 1099 OID. It wants to get those taxes redirected to the foreign grantors trust. And all of the securities that were issued, the banks are operating as nominees for those securities, now belong to the foreign grantors trust as soon as it files 1099 OID. So it can make a claim on all of those past securities if it knows the reference numbers of the mortgages, loans, credit cards, bank payments, the tranches, the reference numbers for each tranche. It can now redirect the tax, it can redirect the securities to the foreign grantors trust, which all comes under back to the Bills of Exchange Act, 1882. You've got a payer and a payor. So the payer is the birth certificate construct paying a payor, which is the recipient of the security. So when the foreign grantors trust files 1099 OID, it becomes the payor, the recipient of the securities. You close the loop, and the taxes that the investment bank is paying for the use of those securities, because remember, the investment banks are using the securities as nominee, as a fiduciary. The securities never belong to them. Now the foreign grantors trust is filed 1099 OID, and if you look at the IRS publication 1212, because the foreign grantors trust is filed 1099 OID, it has now become the holder of those securities that it's filed against.
Right. Okay.
And as the creditor, it's entitled to all the taxes that have ever been paid on the use of those securities. And the IRS, as the bankruptcy trustee, the United States Treasury IRS is the bankruptcy trustee, have to reroute the taxes that the banks as nominees have paid for the use of those securities. Now they have to redirect the United States Treasury has to redirect the taxes to the foreign grantors trust.
It's genius, isn't it, what they've done here, when you think about it? Because most people will think, well, I am the birth certificate. So, you know, if this 1099 OID is the way forward, then I'll file that. But they're filing as the birth certificate name because they think it's them. The birth certificate is a debtor entity, not a creditor. They, as the living man, woman, cannot or are not recognized as the creditor on that monopoly board. So you can't step on it and say, hey, I'm the creditor here. You can't do that, can you? So you have to create this other entity, is what you're saying, this 98 series foreign grantor trust that's not part of the bankruptcy system, not part of the US jurisdiction, that when it files 1099 OID, it becomes the creditor on behalf of the living, who is then the beneficiary as the original creditor. That's kind of how I'm seeing this. I'm trying to explain it in simple terms for people, but the way that it's a real maze, isn't it? People to try and figure this out and understand all the moving parts and do this themselves. You know, you can't just sort of write this down on a piece of paper and just off you go. This is quite complex stuff. So, you know, once a person corrects that ledger, those ledger entries, where does that money go? What happens at that point? You know, how does this 98 series trust protect those funds? Because if the investment banks are paying taxes, and what you're saying is those taxes, where they're paying them onto these modules, there's different modules that they pay onto. One of which I think you said was the 945 module. That is the specific module that they pay taxes against human signature credit energy. So guys, there is an actual tax module for this, which tells you something quite significant. Number one, that they clearly don't own those securities, otherwise I wouldn't be paying taxes on them in the first place. But also, if there's an actual module for signature credit energy, then signature credit energy is real. It's not something that we've made up. It is real. It has value. That is the spark that starts all of these assets off from when you were 18 right through to however old you are now. So let's say somebody does this, Ian, and they have the 98 series trust set up, and the trust has filed a 1099 OID. You know, the securities have all been found through these tranches, got the QSIP numbers, we've verified where they are. What happens at that point then? Because if they're paying taxes on the 945, I'm assuming it comes from the 945 module, it's paid from there, or how do the mechanics come into place in this last little bit?
So the IRS have already got the taxes. They've already received them, or if they haven't received them on the 945 module, they can be moved on to the 945 module by the foreign grantors trust, because it's got an entitlement to the taxes. It's a creditor. It's got absolute lawful entitlement to the taxes that on the securities, which now belong to it, because it filed the 1099 OID. It now has the absolute entitlement to the taxes on its own securities, because the securities are now registered to the 1099, to the foreign grantors trust. Okay. So the IRS have a payment mechanism called Trias 310. So they actually have a tax redirection mechanism called Trias 310. Okay. So the foreign grantors trust provides a banking reference to the United States Treasury.
Yeah.
That says to this Treasury, well, you know, whatever the value is of this tax direction, pay it to this bank account under this reference number, which is the bank account connected to the foreign grantors trust. And that's how the foreign grantors trust gets its tax redirection. It's through Trias 310. And then the foreign grantors trust can move those funds to another trust, which would be the private treasury, what we call the asset fortress protocol, for the member, who can use that on the monopoly board in a private way as their private treasury with a bank account to spend and redirect again.
Wow. So this isn't just a one-time event then. This is, if it comes from this Trias 310 comes into the main 98 grantor trust, and what you're saying then is that it's then moved from there to the members, another trust structure, and that's going to be their private bank account, which I'm assuming will just, you know, have a bank card to it. It's no different to maybe using a high street account, but it's private. And then when they spend from that bank account, they're now issuing more securities. Same thing starts all over again.
It goes round in a loop. It's like it goes into an infinity loop. The more securities are created, the more there is a limit. You know, you can't. It's not unlimited amount of securities you can create and redirect taxes on. It's actually a $2 million a year limitation, without getting in deeply into manual reviews and all kinds of stuff which you don't want to go into.
No,
you don't want to have a lot of manual reviews. There is a safe limit of $2 million a year. Stay underneath that level, and you shouldn't get any holdups in the process. So if you redirect $2 million in the first year,
right,
the foreign grantors trust as the asset fortress protocol spends $2 million in that first year, then in the second year it can redirect taxes to the value of $2 million. Repeat, rinse and repeat every year. $2 million every year going forward.
Every single year. So for someone who's in their 30s or 40s, who might have another 30 or 40 years left on this monopoly board, that's $2 million a year for the next 30 to 40 years. That's a lot of money.
You know, depending on how many years you're going to play Monopoly for. If you're going to play Monopoly for 50 more years, if you're in your 20s or 30s, there's $100 million in the future every year, broken down into $2 million a year times however many years you've got left. Maybe you're 60 and you're going to play Monopoly for 25 years. Well, that's 50 million that you can redirect. So, you know, for most people that come into this, it's not about $2 million. It's about how many more years you've got to play Monopoly.
Yeah, because to be fair, there's only so much that you can buy with 2 million. You know, maybe in the first year or two, you buy yourself a house, you get yourself set up there, you get yourself some land or whatever, some assets. And then moving forwards, you don't need 2 million a year just for lifestyle, do you? Just for buying your food and going on a holiday or whatever you're going to do, unless you.
No, but what you might want to do is, you know, you might want to use your 2 million a year safe limit for your you know, your personal expenses, and then if wherever the surplus is, go and buy some gold.
Yeah.
Some gold, put that in your trust, where your trust owns it.
Yeah.
And then you're building up a gold reserve.
Yeah.
And now you've got real wealth in your trust, which is not part of the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Because the gold is outside the bankruptcy.
Yeah.
If you go and buy cryptocurrency, that's part of the bankruptcy. You go and buy stocks and shares, part of the bankruptcy. Go and buy bonds, part of the bankruptcy. Arguably, going and buying a property is part of the bankruptcy. Unless you can get the actual legal title to it, it's part of the bankruptcy. So buying physical gold that can be held in a safe, you know, you can get proper custody, proper gold safe. I'm not talking about a safe in your living room. I'm talking about a gold facility with safes and protection and all that kind of thing. Yeah. Now you've got real wealth in your trust.
Yeah.
That isn't part of the bankruptcy, which is why the super rich families hold gold, physical gold. They don't want gold certificates. They don't want gold. They don't want stocks and shares or even cryptocurrency. They want physical assets because they're outside of the bankruptcy. Everything else is registered as collateral for the bankruptcy. So you can be a billionaire on paper because you own Bitcoin and you bought it in, when it first came out in 2009 or whenever it was, 2008, whenever it was. And you might have $1 billion of Bitcoin. That's basically a debt. On the Monopoly board, you can use it, but it's assets that actually belong to the original bloodline creditors, the bloodline bankers, as collateral for the Monopoly board. And what you'll realize is that you don't actually have ownership of it. You have the use of it, but not real ownership of it. But with gold, you have actually got the value of the gold, which is the legal title. You can hold it outside of the bankruptcy of the United States, and that, I think, is the smartest thing to do. Build up real wealth.
Wow. I think what we've uncovered today, if this is the first time you're hearing this, then this should completely change the way you look at the banking world, the way you look at a bank loan, the way you look at a mortgage, the way you look at your signature, and certainly the way you look at the rules of the game. But understanding all of this is just only the first step. You want to know how this really works. If you want to know how you can stop acting as this defenseless debtor entity and learn to step into this process of being the creditor, using the protocols that Ian has put together, predominantly what we call the Monopoly Game Changer protocol, which consists of many of the key components that we've been talking about here. Signature credit recoupment. So signature credit tax redirection as a recoupment. Also the asset fortress. So your private treasury to be able to safe harbor all of your assets and build that true generational wealth amongst other protocols that are part of that unit. Then you need to be in the room on Saturday for this live webinar that we're going to be doing. We do them every single Saturday. This is going to be the main subject matter. We're going to be talking about the birth certificate again. And Ian's going to be breaking it down in more detail. There'll be slides, there'll be visuals, so that if you are, maybe you're more auditory, maybe you're more visual, maybe you're not one for necessarily reading technical data and technical reports, then this will help you get a much better understanding of how the system is rigged, but how you can actually leverage what's already been put in place to your advantage by setting up these structures. So we're hosting a masterclass on Saturday, 10 a.m. UK time, where we're going to break this all down so that you can actually apply these protocols in your life, in your family's lives, in your friends' lives. Spaces are strictly limited, though, due to the private nature. I mean, got to understand that this is pretty sensitive information here. The banks don't want you to know this. They really don't. So we have a limited number of seats on the webinars. It's 1,000 seats that we have. We always get more people register than we can let into the webinar. Typically, that's what ends up happening. So I would advise you to register early. So if you want to know how to do that, here are your next steps. Okay, if you want to register for the webinar, then go here, roswebinars.is. You can register right now. You can post a question. So if you've got a question on what we've spoken about today, because this is going to be the subject matter for Saturday, you've got the ability to post a question there. And then what Ian and I will do is we collate all of those questions together after the webinar, and we cover them one by one the following week, early part of the following week. Typically on a Monday or a Tuesday, we do a webinar Q&A. So register for the webinar. That is absolutely your number one priority, where you can learn more about this. If you want to dig into Ian's technical reports on this, then you can go to ecclesialaw.is. There's about 60 to 70 technical reports on there that Ian's written, breaking all of these protocols down, including debunking some of these myths that are out there, like the birth certificate, treasury, fund, or trust, or whatever it's called, and many other misconceptions that people are falling foul of and getting themselves into trouble with these days. So if you want the truth, if you want to see the real mechanics about how this works, go to Ecclesia Law and look at the reports there. And if you like the content that Ian and I are pushing out here on the ROS Media platform, you'll find more of it on the ROS Media platform. And you can go to rosmediaplatform.is and you can see all the categories on the left-hand side that we cover, interviews. We've got, proof videos on there that this stuff really works as well. The whole 9 yards. We'd love to see you there too. So that's all I've got to say, Ian. Any final thoughts before we let everybody go today?
Well, we're right on the brink of launching for the second time our avatar, which will give you access to me and my knowledge. But you could ask the avatar, ask Ian the avatar. And we launched one and did a pilot scheme launch. The platform that we launched it on banned it within 2 days. So we've completely rebuilt it on a private in a private way. So that it's not censored. So it tells you everything you need to know. If what I'm talking about is complete and utter nonsense, it doesn't get censored, because they don't censor things that are nonsense, complete, harebrained nonsense. They don't censor those things because they might think that a lot of people will actually start believing in it, and it's never going to give them relief. It's never going to work, so they don't bother censoring them. They only censor things that work.
Yeah.
And that's why nearly all of our material is censored, shadow banned, because they know it works. And the avatar that we've built, I believe a lot of people will get a lot of information from it, and it will enable you to not only get information for yourself, but also if you want to spread the word, you can share it with other people through sending a link to it, and you can earn yourself $100 of reward points for everyone that uses it. That you share it, they use it, you earn $100 in reward points, which you can use to offset against the donation, because we run a ministry. It's a non-profit ministry that facilitates what we've been talking about today. But the ministry has got costs, so it needs donations to enable it to carry on. And we want to spread the word through word of mouth. Most of our members of our organization have come through word of mouth, and the avatar is a way of doing that. So also the webinar, if you want people to come to the webinar and you want to send them a link, you can get that link as well, and you'll be able to earn $100 reward points for anyone that you shared the link with who comes to the webinar, stays on it. They have to stay on it for the majority of the webinar. So you've got an opportunity there of spreading this information around and actually earning from it. And if you then want to go one step further and you want to introduce people that want to sign up and go ahead, then you can become an advocate. And then you can get a share of the donations, not just the initial donation, but you can get a share of the tax redirections for everybody that you introduce. And that massively increases your cash flow. If you're looking for passive income, I believe it's the best passive income program in the world.
That's going to benefit everybody, isn't it? Let's be fair, that there's only so many people that we can benefit from this. So guys, it's down to you. You know, you have to take action. Learning about this is one thing, but applying it is another. That's the life-changing part. I'm applying it. You know, I have my 98 series grantor trust in place, ready to receive my tax redirections. The big question is, do you? Because if you don't, why not? So if you want to learn how to do that, and you want to learn how to protect yourself moving forwards, then join us on Saturday for the webinar, 10 a.m. UK time. If you want to watch this again, this will be on the ROS Media platform. So to some of the comments that we've had on socials, I know that we've got people on socials that are sort of recommending that other people watch this content. We've got somebody there saying this is a must watch, especially from 40 minutes onward. So they're kind of tagging other people into the content. If you want your friends or your family to watch this content, this will very, very quickly, within the next couple of hours or so, will have already rendered and will be on the ROS Media platform for you to watch under the interviews section. So you can always guide your friends and your family there, rosmediaplatform.is, all the content's there for you as well. So guys, it's been a pleasure to deliver this to you today, as we always do. We'll see you for another episode, and hopefully we'll see you and you can grab one of those 1,000 seats for Saturday before they all get snapped up at 10 a.m. UK time. But for now, have a great day, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye for now.